Olivia, dietitian at the MLK Health Center and Pharmacy. And today we're going to be fixing 3 different vegetable side dishes. I know in our videos we always talk about getting in more vegetables, following the plate method, so having half that plate is veggies, and so maybe you're just wondering what else can I do? So hopefully this video can be helpful for you. We're going to be fixing roasted Brussels sprouts with a maple and balsamic drizzle. We're going to make some carrot fries, and we'll also be making a cauliflower potato mash. Let's get started. All right, we are going to start with the roasted Brussels sprouts. So I have here, this is about a pound of Brussels sprouts. I do have some tips for picking out Brussels sprouts because they can be a little bitter. And one of the ways just to help make them a little bit more appetizing is making sure you're cooking them through. And if it's a really big sprout, it takes a little bit longer. And then you also risk burning the outer leaves of the Brussels sprout. So then you'll have charred bits of leaves and maybe an undercooked center of a Brussels sprout. So I recommend trying to find some smaller sprouts as opposed to the larger ones. I have done this with the larger ones because I'm not too picky, but if you are picky and you're trying this for the first time, I would get the smaller ones. We will be cutting these in half, and I'll show you that in a second. When you get a larger sprout, you might need to quarter it instead of just in half so that it cooks a little quicker, a little more evenly. But ideally, you can find some smaller sprouts. So like I said, this is about a pound of Brussels sprouts. They do usually have a little stem. If some of them don't, so then I don't worry about it, but some of them have a little bit, so I just cut that little bit off, just a sliver. The more you cut a Brussels sprout, the more the leaves will fall. So we try to just do as little as possible. So we're just gonna cut them in half, and I will chop these Brussels sprouts and show you what to do next. All right, now we have our halved sprouts in a bowl. I'm going to drizzle it with a tablespoon of olive oil or avocado oil, whatever you have, it doesn't really matter. And give that a little toss. I always like to mix my oils and seasoning in a separate bowl as opposed to the pan, because I just feel like it coats it a little bit more evenly, and then any excess oil can stay in the bowl as opposed to just soaking in on your veggies. So it's a little bit lighter that way. You can season it really however you want. I'm just using salt and pepper. So just depending on your dietary preferences, or if you're watching your sodium, you can always omit the salt or just use less. This is about a half a teaspoon of salt and maybe like an 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. Just kind of whatever you prefer. So I'm giving it a toss. It looks like everything's got some seasonings on it. So now you're gonna put it on a baking sheet. I have mine lined with parchment paper. You can just spray yours if you don't have that. I just like parchment paper because it's easier cleanup. So we'll put the sprouts out. And it's really important when you're roasting vegetables to have an even layer. So this is a really big pan, so we have a lot of room here. But if your pan is smaller, you might want to do this in batches, or use a second pan, just whatever your oven has space for. So we just want to have a lot of room, because if they get too close together and they're overlapping, then they will steam, and that's just not the texture we're going for. This is going to help it to have a crunchy texture, which is what we like in roasted veggies. This is going to go in the oven at 400 degrees for about 10 minutes. Then we'll take it out, flip them, put them back in for another 15-ish. It's just, the time will depend on the size of your sprouts. You just want to make sure that this center part is not hard. You want it to be a little soft. Yes, it's going to be crunchy, but there's a difference between crunchy and just rock hard. So that's what we're looking for when these are done. So we'll put these in the oven and go from there. All right, so while either while your Brussels sprouts are cooking or when they've come out, just whatever you have time, we're going to make a maple balsamic reduction to go over them. So I have about 4 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar, and I'm gonna put that in a saucepan over a high heat. And I have 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. Put that in there. So we're just gonna mix this together, and we're gonna bring this to a boil. Just to when it starts bubbling, you can just kind of stir it and make sure it's still got some little bubbles activity, and then we'll turn it down to low, and then it's going to reduce. So there's gonna be less liquid, it's gonna get a little bit thicker, and then once it gets thick, that's when you can take it off the heat, and we will pour it over our Brussels sprouts. The balsamic and maple were boiling at a high heat for about a minute, and then we reduced it to a low heat, and it's been simmering for about 2 minutes now. You can see on the edge of the pot where the line was and where it is now. So it has, well, the bubbles are kind of covering it. I'll go ahead and turn it off so it stops bubbling. You can see where the line was and how it's dropped, hopefully. It will thicken as it cools, but we can definitely see that it's reduced. So now that our sauce is done, we can pour it on our roasted Brussels sprouts. If you're not planning on eating your Brussels sprouts right away, I would wait to put the sauce on, because it will, if it sits for a long time, they might get a little soggy, whereas right now they're nice and crunchy, so we want to keep that texture. You might not need all the sauce, just gonna depend on your preference and how much sauce you want. So I'm just gonna start with a little drizzle. Let me turn it so you can see what I'm doing. Just a little drizzle of our sauce. I don't think I'm gonna need all of it. Oh no, that's plenty. I didn't have a huge batch of Brussels sprouts, so I'm not gonna use all of my sauce, but this is perfect. So they're all covered, and now they are ready to eat. All right, now we are going to move on to our roasted carrots. This is about a pound and a half of carrots. They come in a 2-pound bag, so I did just over half of it. I've already washed these and scrubbed them with my hands. You don't have to peel them, but I do. So you can just peel the carrots, or if you don't want to peel them, you just make sure you scrub them really good before you chop them and cook and eat with them. The only trick with carrot fries is that you just want to make sure that when you cut them into fries, that the fries are as uniform as possible, because this is what's going to help them to cook evenly. So if you cut some really thin, they're going to cook quicker, get a little crispy, versus some that maybe if you cut a little thicker, it'll just take longer for them to cook. And I'm sure you don't want to stand at your baking sheet picking out the ones that are already done and the ones that aren't done. So when you cut them, just make them as uniform as possible. And I'll show you that when I'm cutting them. So I'll finish peeling these and then we will cut. Okay, now we have our chopped carrot fries. Now we're gonna do the seasoning. I have about a tablespoon of avocado oil or olive oil or whatever that you have. Gonna give that a stir just to make sure everything is evenly coated. I like to do this first before I add my seasonings. If you're doing a bigger batch, then you might need a little bit more oil. So this is a very flexible recipe. That's the kind that I like. Okay, so what I'm using for seasonings today, feel free to change it up if you want to do something different. I have some salt and pepper. This is about a teaspoon of salt, so you can adjust that if you need less salt, and a quarter teaspoon of pepper. Then we have some garlic powder and paprika, which I really like paprika on carrot fries. I think it goes really well. So a teaspoon of paprika and a teaspoon and a half of garlic powder. Other things you could do, if you have some dried parsley, that's really good on carrot fries, or if you wanted to be fancy and have fresh parsley chopped for when it's done, you could top it with that. That would be really yummy. If you wanted these a little spicier, you could put some chili powder on it with a little bit of cayenne pepper. That would all be really good. It just depends on your preference. So now they're all mixed. We're gonna put the fries on our baking sheets. They're nice and seasoned. And just like the Brussels sprouts, we're gonna spread them out so they're not overlapping and ideally not touching. Sometimes you just can't help it unless you're laying them, side by side in a little row, which you could do, but I usually just kind of push them around. So again, like with the Brussels sprouts, since we're roasting, we don't want them overlapping because then they'll steam. They won't get crunchy like a fry. And so if you're doing a larger batch or if you have a smaller baking sheet, you'll need to do this in batches. Another way to do this is if you have an air fryer. These are really good in the air fryer. So of course the cooking time is going to be a little different. It doesn't take as long. It's about half the time, I would think, on the little fry setting on the air fryer if you have that, and that's really good too. But we're doing these in the oven today. So we're going to put these in the oven for about 10 minutes, flip them, mix them around. Then put them back in for 10 to 15. It just kind of depends on what they look like when we check them halfway. And then hopefully we'll have a nice crispy French fry, carrot fry. Okay, now we will move on to our mashed potatoes. So first we have some red potatoes. I think I got 6. I got 7 potatoes. We're gonna cut these. I scrub them really good. I leave the skin on. That's where some of the good fiber is. So I just cut them into small little pieces so they cook. We will we'll boil them and then mash them, and then I'll show you where the cauliflower comes in just a second. All right, so I have put our chopped potatoes in this big pot, and I filled it with cold water, enough to cover all the potatoes. And now I'm gonna put a decent amount of salt in here. This is probably a teaspoon, a little more. We want it to be salty water. We are gonna drain this. So if you do watch your salt intake, you could use less. But this is just gonna help with the boiling and the seasoning of the potatoes. So now we'll go ahead and turn this on a high heat and bring this to a boil and let it boil for a few minutes until the potatoes are fork tender, and I'll show you what that is when we get there, and then we'll be ready to drain them and mash them. Now for the cauliflower part of this, I have 2 bags of frozen cauliflower florets. You could get riced cauliflower. You could get a whole head of cauliflower and steam it yourself to add to the potatoes. I just like to have frozen bags of either whole cauliflower or the riced cauliflower in my freezer just at all times, because I feel like it's a very flexible vegetable that can be thrown into a lot of things. This, for instance, and this is one of my favorite ways to add in cauliflower to a meal, is mixing it in with the red potatoes. So a mashed cauliflower recipe without potatoes, yeah, it might taste good, but to me it's usually a little watery, and I just miss the starchiness of real potatoes. So this way we can still get the yummy starchiness of a potato, but we just cut it in half by mixing in cauliflower with it. So I'm just going to pop 1 bag at a time in the microwave, following the directions on the bag. And then when they're done, we will add them to the potatoes later. If you're not so sure about this, feel free to just add 1 bag of cauliflower. This is a big batch of potatoes, so if you're doing a smaller batch, then you could just do 1 bag of cauliflower, or if you just wanted to do half a bag, just to kind of see what it tastes like, feel free. It's very flexible, so if you want more or less cauliflower, whatever you're comfortable with or you want to taste is fine. But really, you're going to taste the potatoes more so than the cauliflower in this dish. So we will microwave these and we'll add them in a little bit. So we have boiled our potatoes. Since this was a big pot of water, it took about 17-18 minutes for everything for the potatoes to cook through, and they are very soft. I haven't done any mashing yet. This is just after I strained it. Dumped it in a colander and then quickly put it back in the same pot. I don't like to strain them too much because I want to keep some of that water we already salted, and it's already a little starchy from the potatoes, and so it just kind of helps with the flavor and the consistency of the potatoes. So here they are. Now we're going to add in our cauliflower. I did cook this in the microwave according to the package, so they are nice and soft. And I'll just dump them in. I don't strain these either. I don't think it's enough water to worry about. Just dump those in. And now we get to mashing. So this is a meat grinder, but you can use it for potatoes. Or if you have a potato masher, you could use that. Or if you like to mix your mashed potatoes, I know some people like to use a hand mixer, just whatever you like, you can do that. All right, so it seems to be a good consistency. Since I'm just mashing it, it's not gonna be perfectly smooth, but I like it chunky personally. This is what it looks like right now. So I'm gonna add a little bit of Tony's to it. This is how we like to season our mashed potatoes. So I have just like a teaspoon, just a little bit. But feel free to season this however you like. If you want to add a little butter, if you want to add a little milk or something, you can. But that's one of the reasons why I try to strain it pretty quickly, and the potatoes and why I don't strain the cauliflower is because that just leaves some water in it, so it's still like it's not I don't feel like it's dry. So I don't think it needs it, but you know, if that's what you like, that's totally fine. You can do that. But here we have it. And there you have it. 3 vegetable side dishes that you can add to basically any meal. Roasted Brussels sprouts, our carrot fries, and our cauliflower mashed potatoes. Feel free to, make these recipes your own. They're not set in stone, so if you want to change any seasonings, feel free to do that. The Brussels sprouts go really well with roasted sweet potatoes, or a baked sweet potato, maybe with some baked chicken. That would be a really yummy meal. You can work those carrot fries in. Just anytime you would have a French fry, just in place of that, you could do carrot fries. So whether you're having a burger or maybe some fish, you could do carrot fries instead, just for something different. And then the cauliflower mashed potatoes, just again, in place of when you would have regular mashed potatoes, you can try this instead, whether that's with a meatloaf or a roast, whatever type of food you like. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like it and subscribe to our channel. If there are any vegetables that you would like to learn what to do with, leave us a comment and we can see what we can do with that. Thanks for watching.